Now that breakfast is the first meal of the day, just putting in a little thought on its preparation can really help us, especially as we trust the Lord to be fruitful as homemakers as well as enhance the same in our households. And that's why in today's video I'm sharing some of my meal prepping for breakfasts that I hope will inspire your own journey as you do the same. In case you're new here, my name is Clara, a homeschooling mom, a stay-at-home mom, a work-from-home mom who is passionate about matters womanhood and the woman and seeking to align to the will of God in light of that. And you're welcome to this channel. I had written down the recipes that I needed to make because usually if you don't write down, once you start, you work so fast that if you're not careful, a lot of time you might forget a recipe or two, especially when you're making engaging recipes such as samosa. So I had my list there and then I began to collect all the things that I needed so that they would be within my reach once I began to meal prep, so that I wouldn't have to keep going in and out of the pantry or all over the kitchen looking for the ingredients. I already also had some cereals out that I had pre-cooked before. In case you missed our other video where we worked on meal prepping, I especially did a lot of cereals, a lot of grains and the stews, and so I got some of them out, one of course for supper and the other two that will be part of our breakfast meal prep. And then those are just some of the things I had in place together with whey. I'm using whey because I had made some cream cheese together with some mozzarella cheese. I mixed the whey and that's what I'm going to use in place of milk or water together with my sourdough. I'm beginning with a cake recipe. Usually I try to do one cake for meal preps. In the past, if you've watched our meal prepping videos, I used to do a lot of cakes, but I think my family just got tired of cakes. So I try to make just one cake, especially a new recipe that I have just discovered or I'm developing. And this particular one, we really loved it, and that's coconut cake. And that's because one of my daughters during her birthday requested for a coconut cake and we really loved it. So I'm working on this one now that I had worked on the recipe. I'm posting it on our other channel, and so I don't have to give you the details. The details are on the other video that I'm going to post in the description below in case you would want this very delightful recipe. I am transferring it into my 2 pans because I was going to bake without an oven, and in that video I explain how I bake without an oven on your gas stove. But in case you're interested, the ingredients were 3 cups of flour, 4 teaspoons of baking powder, 1 cup of sugar, 3/4 cup of oil, 2 eggs, sour milk, some coconut milk, I believe each was 1 cup, and then desiccated coconut. So once I had placed them on the fire and they were baking, I went ahead to begin the second recipe. As you notice, I will not usually clean the containers first that I'm using, the bowls, because really this is the beauty of meal prepping. You keep using your dishes so that you don't have a sink full of dishes, you know. So the second recipe is bread. I'm doing sandwich bread, the normal kind, as well as sourdough. And so I began with the usual kind. I had already combined the dry ingredients, which basically are 4 cups of flour, 4 tablespoons of sugar, salt that is flattened on a teaspoon, and then 1.5 teaspoons of yeast, 1 egg, 1.5 cups of whey, together with 4 tablespoons of cooking oil. So I combined those. As you see, I just combine everything together. Once I have my dry ingredients, I add in the wet ingredients, and then I mix to form a fairly soft dough. As you can see, sometimes I will do no knead and make the dough even softer, almost dropping, but this one is fairly soft. So I'm going to knead it for about 3 to 5 minutes and then transfer it back into my bowl, cover it with a clean kitchen towel and allow it to rest for about an hour. So that's the other recipe that I will set aside and go ahead and work on the sandwich bread with sourdough. Again, here I have mixed the dry ingredients that are almost similar to the other bread. That's 4 cups of flour, 4 tablespoons of sugar, 1 of salt, a teaspoon of salt flattened. So I mixed first the dry ingredients, and then I have 2 eggs in my bowl. I'm developing this recipe, so I'm going to most likely share on the other channel because I really liked it. I'm also going to add in half a cup of whey. I am using less whey because there's a lot of liquid, as you can see in this recipe, including 1 cup of active sourdough starter. I will sometimes use 3/4 cups of sourdough starter, depending on the amount that I have, but mostly I will work with a cup for 4 cups of flour with 4 tablespoons of cooking oil. So add in the dry ingredients and then knead again to form a soft dough. This time I was not going to knead it immediately because, as you know, sourdough recipes will usually take a long ferment. Usually I work with 4 to 8 hours. So what I do is I allow it to rest for 30 minutes. Then I come in and knead it. And I don't have to show this because really, basically you saw how I kneaded the other one, but after 30 minutes I was going to knead it, return it into this bowl, and then allow it now to go for the long ferment of about 4 hours. Now that I started my meal prepping in the afternoon, I would bake it in the evening. So having set that aside, we go to our next recipe. I'm working on tortilla plus samosa dough. I use the same recipe for both because it's easier to work with. I combined 5 cups of flour, 1 cup of sourdough starter, 3 tablespoons of cooking oil, 1.5 teaspoons of salt, together with 2 to 3 tablespoons of sugar, and then I mixed all those together using whey to form a soft dough. I took a break because my alarm had rung to check on my cakes. These ones took about 45, this first one 45 minutes. Baking without an oven, it was ready. The other one I had to add it about 15 minutes for it to be ready. As you know, different burners will act differently. So now we are ready with our bread dough, the initial one of yeast that I had given about an hour to rest. You can see it's now ready and we are good to go with it. So I will transfer it onto my surface, beat it down, divide it into 2 loaves because I'm going to make 2 loaves out of this 4 cups of flour, and then allow it again to proof for about 30 minutes, hopefully. I'm laughing because sometimes when I meal prep, I actually some of these things I forget now that I don't put an alarm, and this is what happened with this particular recipe. I ended up forgetting about it and it really proved a lot, but thankfully it is home, so we work with the recipes from here. They are not for show, they are not for Pinterest, they are for us to work with at home now that we get opportunity to work on recipes from scratch. So once I had lined my bread tins with baking paper, I find it easier to work with rather than greasing them. I went ahead and covered them so that they could proof on the counter as I continued with the next recipe. And this next recipe is sweet potato. It seems I'm working on new recipes. You noticed I am working on my samosa and tortilla dough using sourdough. I'm trying those recipes so that if they work, I will post them on the other channel. And this is because I'm trying to use sourdough as much as possible because I know it's going to make my recipes healthier, easier for the body to digest. And so that's what I'm doing. And this is also another new one where I am mashing some pre-cooked sweet potatoes that I had cooked, boiled, frozen, and I took a few pieces out, defrosted them, and mashed them to form 2 cups of mashed potato. Then I have gone ahead and added in an egg, 4 tablespoons of cooking oil. After I mixed with the mashed potato, I have added in 1.5 cups of maize flour, a 1/2 cup of cornstarch, a third cup of sugar, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, a quarter teaspoon of salt, and then just made it into a dough. I didn't add any other liquid. As you know, sweet potato is kind of soft and so will absorb a lot of the dry ingredients. This one I'm testing, it's gluten-free because some of us on this channel, and I'm really grateful for that, requested for gluten-free recipes, and I'm trying to work on them to just perfect them so that if they turn out wonderfully, I will share on our other channel, Recipes and Hospitality with Clara. So those are the pieces I worked on, scooped with a tablespoon, formed them into those shapes, and then went ahead and transferred them to my oven. You can also bake without an oven, but definitely that I will demonstrate on our other channel. My daughter is working on a late evening snack. She's working on a different kind of tortilla, but it tasted wonderfully. So that's one of the things my daughters will do a lot, experiment in the kitchen, and I think it's developing their cooking skills. So as I worked on that sweet potato recipe, probably I'll call it biscuits. My tortilla and samosa dough had gotten ready, so I just beat it down because it had been resting for about 2 hours, I think, or so. But of course, when I work on this recipe more, I'm going to let it rest, bulk ferment, at least for 4 hours and above. But for now, because I'm testing it, I allowed it for about 2 hours or so. So one of the pieces is going back to continue fermenting, and this one I'm working with it to make my samosas. This wasn't very easy to work with, and I think it's because the sourdough in there, of course, just changes the texture and the workability of this. So I'm still yet to develop this recipe a little more, but I went ahead and divided it into 10 pieces, try to make them as equal as possible. I just eyeball and try to do that. I went ahead and rolled them out into small pieces about 4 inches in diameter. So when you roll the first piece, as you will see, you apply cooking oil on the surface, just a little cooking oil, and then when you roll out the second piece, you place it on top of that one, and then you apply it again with cooking oil and place the next piece on it. The idea is you have cooking oil in between the pieces. So that's what I'm doing until I had all of the 10 pieces arranged with cooking oil in between them, except on the top one that of course we would need to roll out with, so we cannot do that. But the point is, once we place them on a hot pan, we will allow them to cook for a minute or so, and we can peel it off each piece very nicely once it is on the fire. So that's where the challenge came with my sourdough samosa wraps. So I'm still to develop this recipe to ensure that it works out really well. So when you roll it out, once you've arranged the oil, it's so easy to roll out. I think the oil makes them very easy to roll out. So you make sure you don't roll too big so that they fit in your pan. So you saw I peeled them off like I'm doing, but some parts just were hard to peel off, and I don't know whether it's the sourdough issue, but you can see I kind of wasted, in quotes, 4 of the pieces because they refused to peel off from the other pieces really well. I'm saying in quotes because I really didn't waste them. My daughters deep fried them and made very nice crackers out of them, and they really enjoyed them. I also enjoyed them as I was meal prepping. So you don't have to waste them in case they tear badly like mine did. So the remaining pieces that were at least okay, I cut into quarters, made some glue out of all-purpose flour and water, so that now I could make my samosa pockets by folding along the part that is curved flipping over the remaining part, as you can see. And that's how I form the parts, so that the upper part can flip over and cover the samosa once I put the filling in. So I'm making the filling out of this black-eyed peas that I had added some minced meat. I had already cooked the minced meat with onion, some garlic, and I'd also worked on the black-eyed peas, making them, frying them with some onion, tomato. I believe I put in some spices and then allowed them to cook without liquid. So I combined also with some peas, dried peas that I had boiled. Those ones I hadn't done anything to it. I just combined them into this so that I could form my samosa filling. And of course, now that I'm doing this as I talk, we really enjoyed these ones. I thought they are very nice, budget friendly, because I didn't have to use a lot of minced meat, very little minced meat. The rest was vegetable, or rather cereal, as you can see. So applied some glue on the flap that was remaining, as you saw, and covered that. Also, what happened with this is, because I don't know whether again it's a sourdough, but they became very brittle, so I had to be very careful with them. One of them, but thankfully most of them fared really well, but one or two of the pieces was, tearing. But what I was doing is taking some of the extra pieces that had gotten torn, the ones I was telling you we turned into crackers, just take a piece of that, apply some of the glue on it, and then patch the place that had torn. I'll show you what I mean by how they were tearing. Now just look at that. You see, like this one that was tearing, it was very hard to bring it together with just glue, so I had to apply on a piece of a samosa wrap another one. It's one of the ones that was wasted, that tiny one. Applied, sorry, I thought I had focused my camera in a way you could see, but I applied some glue on it, went and patched that part that was torn, and it worked really well. It actually held it in place, and I was good to go with my samosa piece. I think one or two did that, but the rest fared very well. So I went ahead and filled all of them, as you can see, and then I lined my container, or my storage container really, with some baking paper. Now that I know they are brittle, so I had to store them very carefully, transferred them flat onto that baking paper, then placed another piece of baking paper on that surface, and then arranged the next layer onto that one, and then went ahead and covered it again with baking paper. And then they were ready to be stored in the freezer so that we could use them for breakfast the next week. So that was the other recipe that was done. I now went ahead and worked on the remaining dough. Like I said, I used the same dough for samosas as well as tortillas. Interestingly, the dough worked very well. It didn't give me a lot of issues when I was working on the tortillas, but I worked on it almost the same way with the samosas. Just kneaded it a little, beat it down, and then divided it into 10 pieces as well. So as I was doing this, I remembered my bread. Oh my goodness, you can see it had really proofed. So what I did, I just applied my egg wash on it and transferred it into the oven immediately. And thankfully, I remembered just in time after my sweet potato biscuits, let's call them those, probably that's what I'll call them, were ready. They were really nice, but I would say I really liked them even more after they were frozen, defrosted, and ready for us to use. So I continued now rolling out my tortillas. I simply roll them out into chapati pieces basically. So I try to roll out as many as I can, at least 3 to 4, so that once I start cooking them, we go really fast. So I don't use any oil as is typical of tortilla pieces. I just ensure they cook on one side and then turn have them cook on the other, and then we are good to go. They are really fast. That's why when I am ahead with a number of them, I really love that. So that's what I did with all of them, and then we were good to go. So you can store them the way they are so that you use them in the future. I believe you can do that. I've never really done that, but I know there's a time I will probably do that so that you can fill them in with anything that you have on hand. So now I am preparing my filling. I'm using the same filling that I used for samosas, except that I'm going to add some onion to this one just to make it different. Then I'm going to add some green pepper, that's hoho. If I had the red peppers, I really like them also. Usually I will add them in as well. The only thing I forgot to add in was some mozzarella cheese that is homemade as well. As you know, cheese can be quite expensive. I had some, but I completely forgot. I love to put it also in tortillas, but they still tasted okay. So that stretched them, but thankfully, even if the filling would be too little, I would still try to store my pieces now that I have seen them stored by different people and I know they fare well. I would probably just store them, but thankfully this filling was just enough. I'm making them in a simple way, not complicated, just sealing the edge so that the filling is sealed in and then gluing it, and that's it. Now that I was going to store them in the freezer already filled, but if I was going to fill them afresh, that would be a different story. I wouldn't have to glue them because you would just cook them and eat them, and especially if you have cheese that can hold all the other ingredients together. By now I was exhausted, but thankfully this was among the last of the things that I was working on so that we could have our supper and call it a day. So I stored the tortillas again the same way that I did the samosas. Yeah, I just lined my storage container with some baking paper and then stored them. The reason I do this is because when they have frozen and then defrosted, even for samosas, I realize they get very delicate, so they have to be handled with care. So when water drops on them, they can actually tear on that part. So usually I try to work with baking paper these days just to ensure that they will make it through to when we get to fry them and to have them for breakfast. So those ones I didn't have to put a lot of baking paper in between. I mean, they are so big. I just covered with baking paper and I'm storing them actually when they have cooled down, and then I'm going to transfer them into the freezer again for use in the coming week. So I will take just a few more minutes to show you how we used each of these recipes, just in case you're wondering how did you make them for breakfast when you did. You can see we had already worked on our bread. I had worked on my sourdough. As you saw, it's the lighter one because it takes longer, by the way, than the normal bread. So I just stored all these in the freezer and we were good to go for breakfast, at least for the next 5 or 6 days, because one of the days, as you will see, I was working on something fresh. Now that some of the breakfasts we work with will just work best when they are fresh. So thankfully most of the things I've prepared today freeze very well, so you don't have to worry about the freezing part. So when I'm storing this, by the way, it's the next day, so I will begin to share the recipes. So with the coconut, that is how they turned out. When they were ready, I flipped them back into the pan so that they can brown on that surface. They really had firmed up and they were ready, so that is optional. You don't really have to flip, but if you want them to brown on the surface, you can flip them over and allow them to cook for 10 minutes. But for more details, you could check out that recipe. So because I was working on a cream cheese frosting, a coconut actually frosting. I frosted these cakes for our breakfast that first day, but you don't have to do this, as you know. But I can tell you will love coconut cream cheese frosting. I really loved it. My girls loved it. It's one of those that I enjoy, as an older person now who is careful about sugar and such, but we really loved it. But we don't put a lot, as you can see, we just put a little. But usually when I work with cake, I don't have to frost it. I just work with it. Could be banana, whatever cake I choose for meal prepping. The next day we did these sweet potato biscuits. I worked with this custard sauce. One of the things about having my daughters experiment in the kitchen is I find things gone sometimes, and I didn't know they had already used my custard powder and finished, so I had to make custard sauce from scratch. Well, I'm yet to perfect it because I really found there's something that needs to be done, but we really enjoyed it. As you know, custard is made from egg yolk, some milk, I believe, vanilla, and I will add the other ingredients over there, but I just made a simple sauce and we were good to go. The next day we worked on the bread, and because we had a guest, I added some sweet potatoes. As you know, I boil quite some amount of sweet potatoes so that we are ready to work with it creatively. And so I thought, now that we have someone, let's work with the two. And I'd run out of eggs now that we are working on a budget, but adding a protein to that meal would do you good. So this is the day now I did something fresh, and that's our usual drop scone recipe. I mixed 3 cups of flour, 6 tablespoons of sugar, 3 teaspoons of baking powder, a 1/4 teaspoon salt, 1 egg, and the rest was whey. And I mixed it to form a fairly heavy batter that can drop in the pan, but it's not runny, but it's fairly runny, I would say, but it's heavy and it can drop. As you can see, it's dropping, and I made those drop scones. I will usually use 3 pans to do that, and this was the last batch I was working with so that the process goes faster. I had to use 2 pans now that one of my cookers is now really slow. I think something is wrong with it. Well, and the other one was cooking the tea. So that's what we did with the drop scones. We defrosted the samosas the night before, so make sure a lot of these meals you defrost the night before so that you're ready to work with them. So deep fried them again, and like I told you, they were good. We really enjoyed them. So just simply deep fry them until they have a nice golden color, and then you will be good to go with your samosa for breakfast. So I fried them in 2 batches. And that's how they looked on the inside. I'm not sure you can see very well, but they were really tasty. Then we did our tortillas. Again, very simple. Removed them from the freezer the night before. They defrosted, and then we shallow fried them. You just put a little oil, perhaps a tablespoon or 2, in your pan, and then you fry them on one side. I like to give them some time, perhaps 7 or so minutes, 8 minutes on fairly low heat so that they can cook and get hot even on the inside. So once you have fried both sides to a nice golden color, you're good to go with your tortillas. So that's what we did with our breakfasts, and I hope this will inspire your own journey as you meal prep or as you work on creative recipes to enhance your hospitality for the glory of God. So as is always our custom, we will pray and trust the Lord to be with you and I as we continue on our homemaking journey. Please, Father, be with us. Grant that you will be glorified in our homemaking. We pray that as we prepare foods, as we prepare environments that are conducive for your purposes to thrive in the lives of those we are serving, you will be glorified as your purposes continue to prevail in their lives and in our lives for good. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.